like anything with local government at the moment, austerity and COVID has really shot to pieces our finances in a way that we just weren't expecting. So finance is, I think, the biggest immediate hurdle, which I think every local authority is grappling with at the moment. You know, capital assets are okay for the time being, but we can't be reliant on that because they are one-off. You know, it's a one-off thing, and we've got to be certain that we get a return on any capital spend. Which means that we want to use it for housing particularly. Resident buy-in is another one. So the speed at which we need to deliver things, we have to take the community with us. And quite often the housing, climate emergency are things that will change the built environment. And quite often people feel the speed at which we want to deliver, or we are delivering, because Brent is known for delivering at pace, can unnerve and overwhelm and, you know, make residents feel anxious because the nature of the world they're living is changing so rapidly. So it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we're doing it as with residents and not to residents. So that's really important for us. And a lot of the things that we've been doing within Regen is actually when we have big projects come forward, setting up community steering boards to enable us to work with residents who are part of the decision-making process, as well as the council, so that you get that kind of buy-in about what you're trying to do, because then there's a sense of ownership, really, and you can talk through the rationale about what you're trying to achieve. And finally, time, and, you know, some things have to be delivered quickly. We've got our employment figures. The immediate worries are that come January, we are going to have nearly 50,000 people potentially unemployed, which is a huge, you know, if furlough doesn't, if support packages and people aren't able to be retained on their work because they've been furloughed, that's a huge worry in terms of obviously the welfare costs and obviously impact on people's housing ability. Because if, you know, by process, if someone's unemployed and their benefits that they receive does not match the rental that they need to cover or their housing costs, there is a worry of housing and homelessness and issues. That's a real immediate concern. So time is a real factor. And obviously, if anyone declaring themselves homeless will come, we have a duty as a council, and quite rightly, to make sure that we can house them quickly. But then that negates all the work that we've been doing over the last couple of years to reduce our temporary accommodation list. So you go back to where you were 2 years ago in terms of those numbers. So it is time is the essence of climate emergency. We've declared 2030 as something that we want to try and aim for. But again, that will mean huge scale change for a lot of residents in the way that they live their life. So it's a combination: money, residents buy-in, and time.
Just focusing in on one of those to start with, on the issue of climate change and the date of 2030. What's the art of the possible, Councillor Tatler? How feasible really do you think that is, given the current circumstances?
Nothing's impossible. I think that's the premise you have to start with. I think nothing's impossible. It's understanding what are the barriers to achieving that. And I think that the two key things for us really are, well, the three things I just mentioned previously. The scale of my colleagues who lead the member of environment, who's bringing the climate emergency strategy forward, a lot of it will take a lot of communication, engagement, and resident buy-in, and an acceptance from us all that we're all going to have to change the way that we live. You know, when we have residents say to us, because we're trying to reduce, because part of my remit is transport strategy, is to reduce car usage in the borough. And quite often residents will say to me, well, I bought an electric car, it's, you know, it's cleaner. But actually I said, well, it's cleaner in a way, but there's still an element of actually there's more that we could do. You don't have to be using a car every day that creates congestion, and even some of the electric cars aren't as green as you'd want to think. You know, and alongside that is the public health angle. We were a borough that does, we have, you know, 30% of our year 5 reception children are overweight, and that's hugely worrying, and that's primarily driven by kind of inactivity, because we use our car so much. Well, in my view, and I'm guilty of that too. So it's about that lifestyle change, and I think 2030 is not impossible, but it's about how we engage residents. And a lot of people know that there are things that needs to be done. It's whether they're willing to make those changes themselves. I mean, you know, I talked to residents saying David Attenborough is on Instagram because that's how passionate he feels, you know, about how things have to change. And I think it's a generational thing. My daughter's 11 and she's wholly on board with the whole climate emergency thing. I mean, she gets very animated about plastic pollution, and they're very much bought into that whole drive and campaign about making sure that we have a better planet. But I think it's my generation and above that need to have that conversation with ourselves about actually what do we need to do, and that's part of what we have to do as local authority to have those conversations.
And where do a subject close to my heart, where do LTNs fit into that conversation? Low traffic neighborhoods, and we've spoken briefly about this before, but that sort of plays into the challenge of bringing residents with you, as well as the challenge you face on climate emergency, and to an extent on housing as well, because it ties into densification and other issues of housing development. Completely.
And I think, I mean, if you take an example of LTNs, for example, so we had obviously the climate emergency that we declared last year. One of my colleagues chaired a task group on air quality in Brent called Brent Breathe, which is a great report. If anyone gets a chance, just Google it and you'll be able to find it. And one of the recommendations was looking at LTNs, low traffic neighbourhoods across the borough, particularly along the North Circular. Now, we've been looking at ways to try and see whether we can get funding for it, because we can't use existing revenue. We just don't have that existing revenue to be able to pursue LTNs through our existing budgets. So when the opportunity arose in May, the government launched their funding for it. We took it. We said we have, you know, there's an opportunity here for us to at the very least try something, because the schemes that we were expected to install had to be temporary, weren't, you know, permanent measures. But to give an idea of what the impact it could be. So we took a chance and we bid for some money. It came by a TfL street space scheme. And we're looking to introduce 9 LTNs across the borough. We've got a strategic cycle route that we've done across the Harrow Road. If anyone you know, it's sort of the junction between Wembley and the North Circular that we've just put in. And we've introduced 33 school streets, which are fantastic, and they've been overwhelmingly successful, you know, and I think everyone can understand the importance of those. The LTNs, I think the difficulty we found is that the conditions attached to the funding meant that we had to install them by a certain time, and it created a lot of angst because there wasn't that normal consultation beforehand. And whilst we are doing the consultation during, so we're doing it through experimental traffic orders to allow us to kind of, for the very first 6 months, see how they're working, and then if they need to be moved or adjusted or even removed if they're not working, has caused a lot of issues, not just for me, but across London, and we've seen some of the issues there. But I think what I've taken heart from is that, yes, I think loudest voices who are objecting will always speak first. But those who want to trial it or are quite happy with it don't often speak up. So it's incumbent upon us to speak to those residents, see what their real thoughts are. So that's part of the process that we're carrying on with. But beyond that, we need to address some of the issues on our main roads, for example. You know, we still have traffic that comes through the borough. 20% of our pollution, air quality pollution, comes from road traffic in Brent. So we really need to kind of look at what journeys have to be made and what journeys are just habits or, you know, luxury, if you will. So that needs to be addressed. We need to look at how we can promote our town centres better, so people don't need to drive to further afield for their shopping on an ad hoc basis, but service their local high street. We've got 19 in boroughs in Brent, so why not use this opportunity to support our local high streets? So, and whether we can offer opportunities around, and I know my team are investigating cargo bikes and sort of delivery things, because we have town centre association set up, so whether the businesses themselves can buy into or get supported with cargo bike delivery systems, so it enables people to come by public transport, but then whatever they've bought is delivered through one car rather than several cars, you know. So it's about looking at that sort of long term. Yeah, so it's a combination of factors, but I think it won't be easy. You know, I'm not going to lie, it won't be easy, but I think we have to start somewhere.
Another thing you mentioned when we were talking about the wish list you have for the borough was your own development company and your in-house capacity to be delivering houses. What sort of challenge is presented in terms of resources for the council? I mean, how have you coped with developing 700 homes, for example?
Well, we've taken the conscious decision that through the budget processes that we've had to undertake over the last 10 years, because housing is such an important, well, it's the most important issue that we have to resolve. We've taken the conscious decision to make sure that we are not cutting or under-resourcing our planning, our property, our housing teams for that reason, because actually cutting there is basically cutting your nose off to spite your face. It just won't, it will impact our ability to deliver. So, and if we don't deliver, our TA or temporary accommodation bills, residents living in poor housing, our council housing waiting list it just won't be addressed. So we've taken that conscious decision not to do that. So we have a fully resourced planning department. We've got a strong property team that look at commercial buying as well as the development arm. And then we also have a very strong housing team that look at sort of housing delivery aspect of it. So we're and obviously a strong regen team that look at sort of viability, so on. So we've made that conscious decision. Actually, that spend is kept, or that resourcing is kept, and it's delivering for us in a way, because actually our housing numbers are exemplify that. You know, in this year, according to GLA figures, we're the London Borough delivering the most affordable housing starts.
But there must be a lot of pressure on that situation. I mean, do you think you can maintain that position?
Yes, because corporately and organizationally, the entire organization is geared up to the fact that actually we all know that housing is the number one issue that we need to address, and alongside that, obviously, the wider strategic and placemaking conversation that needs to promote better health and better lifestyle. So even in the children's department, adult social care, so we have housing that's also being delivered through independent accommodation for our elderly or care needs. Everyone's geared up to the fact that we all understand that if housing is so important to people's well-being and outcomes, that for a child who's struggling at school, having a decent home will make a huge difference in their ability to study at home, or having the ability to be more independent for longer, reduce our care costs. So, you know, whilst our majority of our budget will go on care, everyone is geared up to saying, actually, we can help residents' outcomes, but also our end bill by ensuring that housing and development continues at speed, and delivering quality homes.